G'day, wherever you are in this wonderful multiverse of ours. This is Mastering Music, Mastering Life. Tony Jack the Bear Manson for another episode from my lovely little haunt, Deluxe Mastering in Melbourne, Australia. And I've had the privilege on this podcast to speak to some incredibly talented people, some real movers and shakers. But today I can say I have legit rock and roll royalty in the shape and form of Mr. Terry Manning from his home in El Paso, Texas. Terry, welcome to Mastering Music, Mastering Life, and thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thanks so much, Tony. It's great to be here with you.
So, Terry, a lot of people would know you. You've produced just a myriad of artists and a lot of great musicians and stars over the years. I think most people that I know, when they think of Terry Manning, they think of ZZ Top, but of course your career goes a long way back. But I would classify you as one of those classic overachievers because I think what a lot of people may not know is, apart from the prolific music career that you've had, you're an athlete, you run marathons, you played varsity basketball when you're in college, you were quarterback in a football team, you run marathons, you've run the New York Marathon a couple of times, you're a hell of a player at racquetball. What don't you do? What haven't you achieved?
I can't draw a stick horse very well. I'm not much of an artist drawing, so there are things I can't do at all.
But you're a photographer. You do photography.
Yes, I am a photographer. That's what I consider an equal career to music, if not greater. It's hard to say, but it's a deep love of my life, is taking just photographs of what I see and like. It's not a specific thing at all. It may be a small, insignificant thing that I want to isolate from the rest of the world, get into a frame, blow it up, print it, have it big, and then go, oh, wow, that little thing that was virtually nothing as we walked by it, when you stop and really look at it, it really has an artistic value. So that's sort of the type of thing I like to do photographically, and I've really enjoyed that. But of course, music has ruled the roost as far as paying the rent, I guess you'd say.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting now, as I've spoken to other people, photography seems to be a common art form or craft that other engineers seem to have taken up, which is interesting to me because I'm not a very visual person. I know what I like when I see it, but I don't know how I go as a photographer. But another great, Eddie Kramer is another guy as well. He's a great producer and engineer, as you know. Also, superb photographer, and has had exhibitions and sold his stuff around the world. And even Ted Jensen, Sterling Sound. Sorry.
Yeah, Brian Adams, Lenny Kravitz, both great photographers as well.
Yeah, so maybe one day I should take up photography and give it a go and see how I go with it.
In a way, the two art forms, if we could call them that, are very similar in that you're either seeing or you're listening to something that you like. It touches you in some way. Let's say touches your heart or your soul, or however you would quantify that. But you want to get it, capture it in some way, either on tape or a digital audio workstation, or on film or digital camera, and you want to capture it. Then you want to complete something such as a print or a CD or a record or something that you can then give to other people in some way, either hang it on the wall or put it on their record player, or however they would either see or hear what you saw and heard, and ideally they like it. Also, in my viewpoint, the way I've done things, if they hate it, that's still okay, because what I did was something I liked and wanted to perpetuate in some way, would touch somebody else in a way. And if they love it, that's great. If they hate it, okay, I got a reaction. What I don't ever want is to meh and just pay no attention to it. But they're very similar forms of capture and exposing to other people.
Yeah, I think one thing that's really important, particularly as an artistic, creative person, one thing I try to highlight to kids I mentor is that Don't try and make art and create things that you think other people may want or that you think may be on trend, or trying to predict what's ahead of the curve. Because more often than not, you're out of your flow. You're out of. I think that art needs to come from your heart. It needs to be honest. It needs to be real, and to just completely shut out what you, even living life, trying to live your life in accordance to the wishes of others. Well, what do you think he'd want me to say, or what do I think I should act like?
I completely agree with that, because to me there are two kinds. Let's talk music. Let's say there are two kinds of music you could record. You could, as you say, try to get a hit just like someone else's hit, or to follow a fad, or just do what other people have done, because that's your goal, to try to make a hit. Or you can do, let's say, Bob Dylan. He wasn't trying to make a hit when he sang his early songs. They were pouring out of his heart and soul, and just sometimes it felt like it was extemporaneously off the cuff lyrics and things that were just flowing out straight from the heart. I know that sounds corny, but I use that terminology a lot. But there are two different kinds of things. I prefer much what you said. You just make what you love. If other people like it, great. If they don't, you did what you wanted and you love it. And as long as you feel you're doing your best, I think that's what you. Too much music today is the wrong kind, I think. That maybe not. That's not true. I don't know. I don't want to disparage anyone's music, but sure. I hear a lot of things that are kind of all the same now. Yeah.
A little bit too formulaic and trying to fit into a certain box and safe. I think a lot of music today is also people going for a lot of safe options. And look, I'm no expert when it comes to being an A&R person, but I think that even the art of A&Ring has not helped music and what's going out, particularly into the mainstream and artist development. And I understand from a commercial point of view why we don't have artist management or artist development, but it's a shame though that we don't have those real old school A&R guys who go out every night, go see bands, who also not only understood music and had gut feel for music, but understood the recording process and could understand engineer jargon and could be in the studio and be the liaison between the commercial aspect and the creative aspect of the record making process. What do you think?
Yeah, that's, being A&R is a really tough job, I've always thought, because you've got to straddle both sides of the fence. Now, I think, as you just alluded to, as you go farther back in time, you had the Chris Blackwells, the Erdigans, the people who were either owning or in charge of the labels, who were true music lovers. They came up out of the love of, for instance, Chris Blackwell, who is a great friend, a lifetime friend, just lovely, lovely man. But he came up with literally going to gigs in Jamaica and selling records out of the trunk of his car, and then moving to England and doing the same thing. And he did it because he loved it. And he didn't try to be a Harvard graduate business guy, although he turned into quite the businessman, or the Terry Ellis's, or the Erdigans, as I mentioned, Herb Alpert, Jerry Moss, so many people who were either musicians or just deep, deep lovers of music, ran the labels. Now, I'm not putting down anyone who's at any label today. I'm sure there's still some great people, but I think there's a little more of a leaning towards, I came out of business school and I'm running it for the stockholders and I want to show the bottom line. That's all great, but it's the A&R guys stuck right in between. These creative guys, let's say it's a band, it's 3 or 4 guys or girls, and they write their songs and they huddle out in the garage and they practice and they get it all together and they're just really being the creative geniuses. You've got that side, and then you've got the business side. And here's the poor A&R guy trying to see both sides, straddle that fence. It's tough. It's really tough. I find a lot of some musicians, you take the Mick Jaggers, the Paul McCartneys, they're great business people as well.
Sure.
And they can make their business decisions quite well as create wonderful music. But I think overall, a lot of creative people don't even want to do business, and they don't really have a natural bent towards doing business. So it's a bit of a tough thing for them. Yeah. Whereas on the other side of the fence, a lot of today's music people at the heads of labels are trying to sell it, maybe don't know the creative side of it. So there's that A&R guy right in the middle. So
he's in the crossfire. Yeah, he's in the crossfire. And look, I think now there's probably more independent guys going out there and consulting. And I guess things change and evolve over time. I just remember growing up, A&R was an area that I actually considered as a youngster, because I had aspirations to be a producer myself. Mastering is something I just fell into. I tell people it's something that found me, because what the heck did I know about mastering in 1981? I mean, all the records that I would be consuming, all the credits, there was always a production credit and a mix engineer credit, but hardly ever did I see any mastering credits back then. It's only been the last 20 years, I think, that we've seen more, profile, shall we say, given to mastering guys. Hey, can we just talk about Chris Blackwell for a sec, or more specifically, Compass Point? I think a lot of people would be interested to know about Compass Point Studios, how that came about, and of course with the seminal Back in Black, my all-time favorite album, and album that would bring me back from the dead. I've always thought that Shoot the Thrill is a sonic defibrillator. If I said to my wife, if I'm ever a flatline, play that tune and I'll come back. I will. I'll resurrect from there.
I'm right there with you. I'm with you 100%. That, and to get off topic just a little bit, to go back to Highway to Hell, there's a couple of tracks on that. Girls Got Rhythm, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
A couple of them I'll just put on. For instance, again, I'll wander a little bit, but I'll get back to topic.
That's cool. It's all good.
And we were doing the ZZ Top Eliminator album. Every day we would walk, Billy Gibbons and I would walk in the studio. We would put on Highway to Hell and just blast it through the studio monitors, the gigantic JBLs at ear-splitting level, and go, okay, now we're ready. And that's just what that music, Mutt Lange, he really hit the nails on the head, and of course Angus and Malcolm and the rest of the guys in the band. But I'm sorry, you were talking about Chris.
Yeah, no, don't be sorry. We could talk for hours, and I completely concur with everything that you just said. But so tell us about Compass Point. How did it come to be? And I'm very curious to know about what it was like operating a studio in such a remote location, where you needed things to be working all the time and you couldn't afford downtime on especially a console or, tape machines and, rare vintage equipment, and how you circumvented those kind of situations. So how did it all begin? Tell us about that.
Well, it began without me. Chris Blackwell started it in late 77, 78-ish, right when Bob Marley was leaving Jamaica, and when Bob had to leave Jamaica from a shooting that happened, and many people may know the story. Bob came to the Bahamas, and he actually lived in Chris Blackwell's apartment upstairs. And Chris had a small house there. That house became the front office and a residential apartment for artists of Compass Point Studios. So Bob and Chris just brainstormed a little and said, well, this is a great place. Jamaica's not happening for us because politically they had some problems. And so he said, we'll just do it here in the Bahamas. So he built on the back of his apartment that he had, and first built one studio, some offices, bathroom, hallway, just a nice one studio facility, and opened it up. And quite quickly, because of course he owned Island Records, so he had a built-in client base, started getting lots of other people, AC/DC, Rolling Stones. I could go on. The list is amazing of people that came from the beginning because of Chris Blackwell. So that went for several years, and he added a second studio on, and a gigantic recreation room, we called it, with pool table and foosball and soda machines and, booths to eat. Just a really nice, beautiful, big facility. He ran that. Of course, Chris had so many things to do. He couldn't sit there and run it every day. He had to be at the office of Island Records, Basing Street in London, or wherever, all over the world. So he had his people in there to run it for several years. A guy was running it up to the mid 70s, I guess, named Alex Sadkin. Alex was a great producer, a mastering engineer. He started in mastering, was the mastering engineer at Criteria in Miami. Mm-hmm. And then Chris brought him over. He became an engineer and then producer at Compass Point and ran it. Sadly, in about, I forget the year, unfortunately, about 72 or 3-ish, somewhere like that, he was killed in a car crash late at night, coming back with some of the guys in the band that was in, and car rolled over and he was killed. So at that point, it started to deteriorate a bit because nobody who knew the music business, because you can't just, no offense at all, they're great island people that we could get to work, but they don't know the music business, the worldwide music business. Yeah. So you had to have someone on site who knew the business and the people and could bring clients in and just sort of do the whole thing. He didn't have that for a few years. So it started going down. Chris decided to stop accepting sessions and it just sat empty. Then I contacted Chris I'd lose you. I can't keep track of years.
That's okay. We don't need to be historically super accurate here.
Years just roll one into the other for me. I don't even know where we are today.
I hear you.
In the early 90s, I was wanting to move from Memphis, Tennessee, where I was, and had been looking at the Cayman Islands to possibly put a studio. Ran into lots of governmental troubles there. They just didn't quite understand what I was doing, why we needed to have huge customs fees waived because of bands coming in, don't want to pay duties on top of everything else. It just wasn't understood. So I gave up on the Cayman Islands. But I got in touch with Chris through Holly Ferguson, who worked with Island Records, was a longtime friend. And she said, well, come check out the Bahamas, Compass Point. So I got in my plane, flew down there. Chris flew in from England. We met, looked it over. Beautiful facility. It's kind of funny. We talked a little bit, and I wasn't sure because in my mind, I had worked years and years and years in the music business already. At that time, massive productions going on, all the big groups that I'm associated with, one after the other. I had worked literally 7 years in a row, every single day, without a break, without a holiday, sometimes the end of a session just overlapping, and I was doing 2 studios at once to finish one and get the other started, and it was just driving me nuts. So I wanted to, I don't like the word retire, but I wanted to semi-retire and lay back a little bit and do a little less, but still have a studio where I could work, just sort of, I had a vision of a tropical island and breezes and sort of taking it easy. And I was mentioning this to Chris, and he laughed. And at one point, he had this big key ring in his hand, and he's tossing it up in the air and catching it. And I kept wondering, what is he doing with that? Is that nervous habit thing? And we're talking, and at one point, he said, well, I think we ought to do this. And next thing I knew, those key rings, it was flying across the room at me, and I just instinctively reached up and caught it. And he said, well, you're in. I guess we're partners. And, oh, okay. I guess we are. So that was it. And we became partners in the studio at that point. And I moved down there and took it over. And boy, talk about not lying on the beach, not sitting in a tropical breeze, not semi-retiring, taking it easy. When you're suddenly running a 2 large facility and a 3rd production room, and clients in both or all 3 over and over all at once, and you're trying to also engineer or produce your own projects when you could schedule them into your own studio you thought you had. It was just around the clock, busier than ever. So there was no taking it easy. But that's okay because it was a beautiful place. It was a lot of fun. But you mentioned the problems you can have in a place like that.
Yeah.
Since it's a destination studio, meaning you're not in New York, you're not in LA, you're not in Sydney, you're not in London, you're not in any of the big places or Melbourne, no offense.
No, not at all. Not at all.
The big cities where the studios are and people go, you're far away. The artists like that because that means the label's not dropping by every day checking up on you. They have to make a special trip to come do it at their expense. So the artist is more separated from the business. They're more in a creative atmosphere. And the other problem you get is that everyone has to travel there. All the equipment has to be cleared through customs because it's another country.
Yeah.
Wherever you're from. No,
yeah.
Almost, we have a few local clients, but the bulk of the business, the large bulk, of course, was international business. So everybody's coming from another country. Everyone wants to bring their equipment. The band REM, when they came, they brought 99, not small by any means, huge equipment cases. They brought everything they owned in a gigantic 40-foot container.
Wow.
Stuffed with 99 cases of gear. Try clearing that through customs easily.
Huh.
And I went to the government. I got a waiver. I actually wrote a law that was passed through the Bahamian Senate into law because they wanted to collect huge customs duties on equipment that a band brought in just to use in the studio and then took back out.
Yeah.
They weren't bringing it in to sell or leave it or anything like that.
Yeah.
So the government was trying to get a 20% duty on that. And I just went to the finance minister and said, look, this is not going to work. And he said, I explained why, and I won't go into the details, but I explained why that wasn't what we needed to be doing. And he said, well, write a law. Here's the law as it is now. You write what you need. Okay. So I went back, sat down at my desk and hand wrote, took what he had. And I was in law school for a while, so I've always done my own contracts. So I'm a bit
savvy. You're savvy when it comes to wording it. Yeah.
Yeah. So I wrote what I thought the law should be, took it back to the Minister of Finance for the nation, and took it to him. I said, now you can touch it up with legal words if you need to. And it's just fine. He walked into the Senate. They passed it. So we then had duty free just for Compass Point Studios and on all temporary equipment. So it was just hurdle after hurdle. If something broke, I had a great on-site tech guy named Ozzy Bo. He was a Bahamian guy, but he was brilliant. He's a genius, really. And he had learned from many engineers coming in, studied books, and he was quite good with general tech. So he could take care of a lot of things. But if it was something specific, if it was something with Studer that required a Studer part, they had to fly in. There's just no way around it.
Yeah.
SSL guy had to fly in. Whatever it was dependent upon proprietary parts or something.
Yeah.
Or schematics. They had to come in. It just wasn't easy. I had two guys who were very good tech guys for other studios in Miami and in Memphis. They would come in often. They came in for the install, of course, because I tore out so much and just built it all back up. It was just massive, massive work. And there was always something going on. Yeah.
Terry?
Yes.
Can I just ask you one of those? I'm just going to go out on a limb and try my luck on this. Was it Janice? I can't think of his first name. Your mate, he's a tech guy. Worked at Criteria for many years. His surname is Janice. No, I am.
Oh, you mean Larry?
There we go. Sorry, Larry. Forgive me, Larry. I forgot your first name.
I didn't bring Larry into Compass Point. No, there's another guy named Ross who worked with Larry and everyone at Criteria and all around in Miami. But yeah, had I known Larry at the time, he would have been there too.
Yeah, he's one of the smartest, most intelligent blokes I've ever come across. Fascinating guy.
Yeah, Larry, we're partners on a couple of things that we're designing right now. he's mainly designing, and I'm just putting a little input on. But
Yeah.
he's a brilliant guy. Yeah, very good friend.
A bona fide genius, and I love his sense of wit, and he's sharp, and he's got a great taste in music. I often said to him, Larry, you are going to DJ at my wake. If I die before you, you are going to be playing the records, because your musical taste is impeccable, my son.
He's got LTV right now on Facebook. His Larry Television.
Yeah, I know. It's great.
He's great.
It is absolutely good value. So let me just rewind back a little further to Ardent Street, because again, Ardent Street is one of the great studios of the world. I mean, obviously in Memphis, which is home of rock and roll, of course. So tell us about your days at Ardent. And also, because I know that that was a studio where you produced one of our local artists here, Diesel, so Johnny Diesel Injectors, and the great High Fidelity album, which still to this day is certainly right up there in my top 100 albums. I still every now and again go back to that and listen to it, and it's just it's a magical record, absolutely magical record. So tell us about Ardent.
Yeah, I ended up super Australian connection there for a while with Diesel and the Angels.
That's right.
Doing multiple projects and coming to Memphis. That was fantastic.
Yeah.
But the start of not Compass Point, but Ardent Studios, the start of that was in a guy named John Fry's house. John was one of my he sadly passed away a few years ago now, but he was one of my lifetime huge friends forever. We were just so close. From the beginning. I played in a local band in Memphis, and we ended up going to work at John's home studio. Now, we say home studio, and you, in those days you have a picture of what could that be, but he had some money in his family, and he had done it right with Ampex tape recorders and Neumann microphones and really good stuff. He had an Altec, one of the green Altec radio boards, consoles, that tube console. It was at the time we couldn't wait to get something bigger, better, and have faders. But looking back, God, everybody wants one of those now.
Absolutely.
Record through, but it was a great facility in his spread over 3 rooms of his parents' house, and John was still in university at that time. But he ended up leaving university and just sort of wanting to go full time. He started a record label called Ardent Records. Just before I came and my band came into the situation, he had formed a record label called Ardent, and his partner was Fred Smith. And many people may know the name, but some may not. Fred ended up starting another company later, which he's run all these years. It's called Federal Express.
Yeah. Yes. So, well, I've heard of it before, once or twice. Yeah.
Well, in fact, it intertwines the two stories, because I sent the very first package on Federal Express.
Really?
The day that the loan had come through and the approval from the Federal Aviation Authority, and the first planes were there, jet planes, not the little propeller practice planes for proof of concept, but the real airplanes. I took the first package out, and we had a ceremonial thing. There was a party and streamers up in the little office they had on Democrat Road in Memphis at the time. But that's because Fred and John Fry were friends from school, from 10 years old. They were friends and had started the Ardent label together. He called John and said, "You want to send somebody out for the first package?" And John said, "Well, Terry, here's a cassette, so you have to go out and you take them." So I ran them out to the airport, and there went the first FedEx package. It's now in the Federal Express history book thing.
Wow.
So it's really interesting, all the things that were going concurrently in Memphis. But John, at that time, decided he wanted to have a real studio, not just in his parents' house, but one to rent, and because his mother already had too many rock and roll guys and long-haired people tromping into her kitchen looking for Cokes or something. So she wanted him out. And John thought, okay, we'll put in a building. So he and his dad went out, found a building at 1457 National Street in Memphis, and we put in the one studio facility. And I became the first employee for John. And then just after that, Jim Dickinson came on, and Jim's wife, Mary Lindsay Dickinson, was the front office receptionist, and Jim was one engineer and in-house producer, and I was the other engineer and in-house producer. And we just sort of all started not knowing who the clients would be or if we'd have business or whatever. But what we did is that John Fry was like Larry, he was just a deeply genius human being. He was so intelligent, so smart, and he really wanted the best of everything, the newest state-of-the-art tech. So in Memphis, we had the very first 4-track machine, which was a Scully. Then when everybody else finally got their 4-track Stax and Willie Mitchell's High or Royal Studios and American with Chips Moment, all the other studios around town went to 4-track, we then got the first 8-track in Memphis, which was a Scully also. And then people would come because we had the newest tech. And when you can go from 4 tracks to 8 tracks, if you're used to recording on 4 tracks,
yeah,
and you suddenly have double the number of tracks,
big deal.
Oh my God. So that brought business in the door just to get bump this over to the 4 tracks and we get 4 more. Yay.
Yeah, totally.
That was a really big deal in those days. So we did that. We got in a ton of Stax business. We did a lot of I was working at Stax already. And so I brought some of that over. That's another story, which we may or not need to get into. But I started working at Stax at the age of 15, 16 years old.
Wow.
After school. And so just being a tape copyist. So I brought over some people from Stax because I was working at both places simultaneously. And people started coming from Nashville. They started coming up from Muscle Shoals. They started coming from New Orleans. Cosimo Matassa brought up things from New Orleans for me to mix. The Muscle Shoals people, I was laughing the other day. I had forgotten completely about it. But Rick Hall had recorded the Osmonds doing 1, 2, 3, ABC, what was it? One Bad Apple, that's it. One Bad Apple. They were copying the ABC thing from the Jacksons, Jackson 5.
Yeah.
So the Osmonds did One Bad Apple, and Rick Hall recorded it and overdubbed everything in Muscle Shoals at his Fame Studios, brought it to Memphis for me to mix. And I had forgotten it all these years and my wife is a big Osmonds fan. She was mentioning that. Said, oh, I worked on that. What? Kind of one of those funny things that happens. But people came from everywhere. So we just got lots of business. And the next thing I knew, an old friend of mine, Jimmy Page from Led Zeppelin, the band I had been in had toured, not a tour, but had played on, opened some shows at Zeppelin, Yardbirds at the time.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't Zeppelin yet. The Yardbirds had played on some shows, and we opened a couple of those. So I had met Jimmy and then gone to another tour, hanging out with him, and we had become close friends. He had come back to Memphis with me, come to Ardent Studio, hung around. So he knew the setup. He knew what we had. He knew what I could do, and he knew the Stax, other things that he loved that we were doing. So he called up and said, I haven't finished the Led Zeppelin, the third album we're doing. Haven't even named it yet, haven't finished it. And but we've got a tour booked. Could you possibly finish it? Help me finish it. We'll come over on days off of the tour, fly into Memphis. I'll come overdub what's needed, fly in the other band members and overdub what's needed. Then we can mix, then we can master, because we got to get this out. I said, okay, sure. He said, but it's on 16 track and we need Dolby. Okay. So we immediately had to buy a 16 track, which we wanted to anyway, to be the first. So we bought the second 3M 16 track that came off the line. Wally Hyder had ordered the first 3. He had taken delivery of the first. The second was about to be delivered when I called him, and I just begged and begged and begged. And when I mentioned Led Zeppelin and we're going to do the album, they finally relented, sent that number 2 machine to me, or to John, at Ardent. And then Wally Hyder got number 2 and number 4. But so it was all worked out. But I also got with Ray Dolby in London. Said, Ray, we've got to get some Dolbys in here and fixing this Led Zeppelin to Dolby. Okay, so he sent the big what was it, 18 rack space A301 gray modules, the gigantic ones with the 2 meters on the front. Sent those units in. So I had it all set up just in time for Jimmy to arrive. So that's what we did at Ardent, was to just be ahead of the local curve, the Mid-South, Southern U.S. curve. Nashville, of course, was also one of those places.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we wanted to at least stay with Nashville in the South. And we did, and got just tons of business. And in 1972, we decided it was just too much business. So we moved to 2000 Madison Avenue in Midtown Memphis and built a 2-studio facility. Now we're double, and it was much bigger, beautiful brick building with courtyard. Later, we had to add on a 3rd studio to the back of that. So it just kept growing and growing, as the business did in those days. So there's part of the Ardent story.
Wow. Hey, can we just talk a little bit about mastering? Because quite a few of my listeners and subscribers are mastering engineers and aspiring mastering engineers. So, so through your career, did you ever have any particular favourites? And I know that there's no disrespect to anyone in this conversation, but did you have any particular go-to guys, or was it a process where it was sometimes record company driven or band driven? Did you often have much of a say in terms of who was to master the record, or did you have?
I would say 99% of the time I had to say. Occasionally, if I was doing 1 or 2 songs on an album that was a compilation or a movie soundtrack or something, then they'd have to go off to master that all in one go. But every project I worked on as engineer or producer or both, a full project, I chose the mastering engineer. For many, many years, I used Bob Ludwig in New York.
Yeah.
He started, I believe he was at Sterling for a short while.
Sterling. He was at Sterling for a little while. Then he went to Master Disc, and then he went off to Maine, and that's where he's been since. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But the main place I would go was his. Was it 16 West 61st, right off the Central Park in New York, right off of Columbus Circle.
Yeah.
Mastered it.
Yeah.
I was there. I probably mastered between 40 and 50 albums there to vinyl with Bob.
Yeah.
And I would go and attend every session, always fly, always be there. And we would always do it together, because I was as great as anyone is. I mean, I certainly trust you or Brad Blackwood or Dave Collins or so many people, Ted Jensen, Bob, of course.
Yeah.
So a lot of great people, Greg Calby, that I would say, yeah, you do it. I know you'll do good. But I still like to be there.
Yeah.
And I would, with Bob, choose certain EQ settings or how much compression was needed, or sometimes would find funny anomalies. And once I found something out of phase, that the guitar solo suddenly went out of phase. So Bob and I were together rigging up some kind of quick throw something out of phase thing just for the solo, so at least you could hear it in mono.
Yeah, that helps.
You never know. Yeah, so finding mistakes and whatever it takes. And literally, I couldn't run a lathe. Now, before that, on the Stax things, I don't want to leave out Larry Nix, because Stax had a Neumann lathe in the Stax building, in the studio building. And Larry Nix became the mastering engineer there. So before I became the producer and engineering outside projects, I would master with Larry in the Stax facility, Neumann lathe. And his funny joke there was the thing that pulled it looked like hair. It pulled it off.
Chip. They call it the chip. Yep.
Yeah, the chip that came out of the lathe. We used to joke in the little bottle that Carrot they caught it in. We said, well, that's Isaac Hayes' hair. We're going to go burn it. We'll go out and back and light it with a match. It would take quite a blaze.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, I would master on the Led Zeppelin album I mentioned, after I mixed it at Ardent in Memphis, I took it over to a local mastering facility called Mastercraft, and mastered it there with the engineer Richard, who was there at the time. The two of us mastered that to vinyl. So I from the very beginning, I've been. I'm sorry, my mind wanders to so many stories.
No, that's fine, Terry. The stage is all yours.
this is such a good one in the mastering sense. Before that, if I had a single or something, I'm talking in the 63, 64, 65 era years, if I had finished a single, I would take it down to Sun. Well, at the time it wasn't Sun anymore. It was Sam Phillips Studios, and walk it upstairs, and Sam Phillips would master on his lathe.
Wow.
So I've mastered with Sam Phillips, then Lariat Sax, then the Mastercraft thing, and only then did I get over to Bob Ludwig and his great setup at Masterdisc. And that was great. I used him many, many times. Also later would go up to Maine to his place when he left New York and built his own facility up there. But a couple of times after that, I had things that had to be done quickly. And the flight from either Memphis or Nassau to Maine, Portland, Maine, is a lot different. You have to change once or twice.
That's right.
It wasn't just one flight to New York, do it, stay overnight, and fly right back, go back to work. It took 2 or 3 extra days. So for about between 5 and 10 albums somewhere, I started going to Ted Jensen at Sterling. Yeah. Also great.
Oh, yeah.
We did many albums together there. So, in fact, one of my proudest moments in the mastering room ever, I took Lenny Kravitz's 5 album with Fly Away on it, and all the other songs. That was his biggest album. Took it up to Ted, and we're mastering it. And on one of the songs, he was playing it through, and he just said, for one of the very few times ever in my mastering history, I'm just going to announce this mix needs not a drop of EQ or a drop of compression or anything. I just want to run this straight through to the thing. And I was, well, how about that?
Well, they're glorious moments even here to get a mix that comes in. And because ideally, again, when I started mastering, it really was more of a transfer and very little processing between source to the lacquer. And obviously over time we have more technology and more ability to manipulate and do some incredible things, and that's kind of cool. But it's always in this century, in this millennium, it's just beautiful when something does come in, and they are rare, and they are moments to be celebrated. When something comes in and it's just absolutely perfect, it's like it's a beautiful day outside. I'm not wasting any time. I'm just going to run it through, and that's it.
When you think about mixing into mastering and that whole process, unless it's just total naive people who don't know what they're doing, or it's just beginners or something, but I'm talking about professionals in the business. When they're mixing, their goal, they're not thinking in their mind, I'm just going to do it this good for now, and then Tony will fix it when we get to mastering. Or Bob will fix it, don't worry. No, they're trying to make it the best thing they can make.
Yeah.
And they ideally are, if you're not doing it this way, why are you doing it? But ideally, when you're listening back to your final mix over your monitor speakers, the main ones you're using to make your decisions on, and you hear it back the way you want it, that's the way you want it. Now, when it gets to mastering, that doesn't mean you want something else. So to me, real mastering of real professional mixed product is to take what somebody decided is the way it ought to be and make it transfer over to vinyl or CD or an MP3 even, or whatever sort of digital file you would make, to transfer it to that so that everything balances together. It's not one song louder than the other too much, or one mix is way this and not the other. You know what I mean? To sort of make an entire album sound cohesive as one unit so that they flow one to the other. But my goal, because I do a lot of mastering myself, and my goal is not to make it mine or to make it changed. It's to make it what they intended translate properly. I guess you know what I mean there.
I know exactly what you mean, and I think that's one of the most important things. Is I often, I don't know about scoff, maybe that's a bit too strong a term, but I still to this day get people say, well, will this sound great on radio? And I said, well, it should sound good anywhere. The only time I would ever consider anything different in the process is mastering for vinyl being a mechanical medium, and there's certain consequences that you got to take into consideration when cutting a lacquer. But other than that, a master should sound great. And I always used to find it fascinating how in America, I was trained by a guy called Rick Essig at Frankfurt One in New York. He was my mastering mentor and taught me how to cut a lacquer. And it was interesting how in America, it wasn't unusual for a lot of albums to be several different versions of masters for AOR radio, for example, for CHR radio. I found that always to be a really fascinating concept, because in my mind, I always thought, well, if a record sounds good, it just should translate. Like you said, it just should sound good across the board, irrespective of where it goes. And obviously it's at the mercy of maybe the shortcoming of the playback system. But I always found that incredibly fascinating how it was so niche orientated. And I still couldn't quite understand what were the differentiations between mastering for CHR format, AOR format, or for maybe I could understand urban format with hip hop, but it always fascinated me. But was that a consideration for you with records at any stage in your career? There needed to be different kinds of deliverables?
Well, I certainly heard a lot of that from record labels. The A&R guy or whoever might be doing some liaison with the label might say, oh, we need this special version for AOR, and this one has to smash for this or whatever. I never got that either, because to me, as you just said, if it's good, it's good. And if you've mastered it properly, it translates from a boombox to an earbud to a great gigantic monitor system people have in an audiophile's living room. Anywhere, it should sound good. Good is good. Flat is flat. And I don't mean everything should be flat, but I mean the curve is the curve. So come on. But we used to hear that a lot. I sort of would usually nod, and a couple of times, in that vein, I would send a mix off pre-mastering to the label, and they would get it, and then they would say, oh, it should be more this, it should be more that. And I'm thinking, they're thinking what it will sound like on the radio. They're thinking what the mastering will do to it, because the mastering does change the music to a certain degree, makes it more, sounds like a record, rather than sounds like a home thing or whatever it might be. So a couple of times I would take the same exact mix and I would just run it through a compressor, brighten it just a little bit. So faux mastering before the days of digital I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Run a new tape copy or a cassette copy through a compressor, brighten it a little, send it back and say, I remixed it. What do you think? Oh, that's perfect. Okay. So that's all they wanted, to hear that compression and brightening, whatever they thought should have been there. But it always got to me that they would say all these things that were needed to be different. And then when you go to a radio station and realize what they're doing, they all have massive compression. I mean, really heavily compressed.
Yeah.
So really, the more compressed you give it to them, the worse it might be. They really need some dynamics before you squeeze it all out of it. So I've tried my best over the years to just calm that one down and just say, the one good mix is the mix. Let's let it go with that. And the formats will take care of it themselves. And it usually works out well.
Yeah, because I think every station has its own output and its own individual sound. And they're always in a state of flux anyway. I mean, I for many years I worked in radio through the 90s and had a major, Triple M in Melbourne's a major rock station back in the day. And they were constantly tweaking their sound all the time. So it's a bit like trying to hit a moving target. How do you know whether this week they're going to be bumping up their top end or they're going to be using more multi-band? You're just lost. So just make it sound good and the rest will take care of itself.
Well, every station, the old word on the street was that every station was trying to be just a little bit louder than the other stations.
Yeah. So
that when you punched that dial in your car and it came out, it sounded a little better and you might stay there longer. But I worked in radio for a while. I was hired at WMC FM 100 in Memphis they were trying a new thing overnight from midnight to 6 a.m. They were going to do an automated thing. They had this huge automation system with reel-to-reel tapes and all this crazy stuff going on. And they wanted me to program the music for overnight for it. So I went in there and tweaked it to my liking. I changed the way the transmitter sounded, the EQs and stuff. I would dub from record onto the tapes that we needed, and I would occasionally speed it up. Even, I remember one Paul McCartney song, where the Wings song, Silly Little Love Songs, I guess it was.
Yeah.
I even sped it up twice during the record, just a little bit. So it kept pushing a little faster. I made the station sound like I wanted it.
Yeah.
So stations do that all the time.
It's incredible. They got to meet their timelines for news, especially when they're, there's a whole network involved. Everyone's got to sync up the exact same time and whatnot. Can we talk a little bit about Eliminator? Because that was again another big album in your resume and a big album for ZZ Top. As it turned out to be, and such a big direction that changes sound. So tell us about what it was like when, how was initially when you guys were making that record and started to bring in more of the, dare I say, disco element to it.
Exactly right.
Being, it takes a lot of guts for a band who have been particularly known for a certain sound to then go quite out there, because it really was quite a step outside their, how did all that go down in the making of the record? And obviously you were vindicated with the final result, but tell us about that time and what it was like, when it was decided that, you guys were going to change direction in terms of of their sound.
Yeah, there are several factors. It's actually an entire book that could be written about that and the change from a three-piece blues rock band into a dance phenomenon with cartoon characters and videos, and just what a massive change. You may know of the movie that's out right now.
Yeah, the Netflix documentary. Yeah. It's very good.
Their top streaming documentary. So I wouldn't tell much about this at all, except that is now out. That has now told some of the story. So I'm a little less reticent to let some of the things go that were sort of proprietary information at the time.
Mm-hmm.
But several factors. First of all, and I mention this only because he's okay with it and it's out in the movie, Frank, the drummer in the band, had some drug problems right at that time.
Yeah.
He's through with it now, still the greatest guy in the world. But things happen sometimes to people. You've got to go on. You've got to do something. So he just wasn't up to what we needed in the studio at that time. So that was one thing. We got to do something besides that. Okay. The other thing, Billy Gibbons had gone to Europe. They had a long period off, and he had gone over to Europe, went to a lot of discos, a lot of dance places, and noticed that when they played certain music, everybody got up and danced. When they played other music, including their ZZ Top things, they danced, but not quite the same way. And you could see this isn't inspiring these people who are now totally into dancing and disco, their entire disco craze. Our music's not inspiring them, moving them. What can we do? So he came back to me and we sort of had a brainstorm of what we should do. So I started, and I'm not a club person. I don't like to go out. I started going to some clubs. I would watch what people danced to, watch what they didn't dance to, what the DJs picked, and I started noting what the tempos were. I actually had a stopwatch, and I was finding the tempos and everything. Of course, we all know the 120 beat is sort of a standard dance beat, which I hadn't thought of that before that. I never thought of, that's not true really, but excuse me. Little thing there. Hope you can
Bless
hear
you.
it. But I started noting what tempos we needed. So we recorded the different tracks for Eliminator, first with Frank and the whole band, but to a click. And then I went back and replaced a lot of these drum sounds and tighten it all up and do things that everyone does today. Excuse me 1 second.
Not a problem, man.
I hate when people do that.
That's
There
okay.
I am doing.
Hey, welcome to being human.
Yeah, really. Ugh, get this lavalier back. So we recorded 2 specific beats that we knew people liked to dance to. Then when I sequenced the album, I started at one main dance beat. Cut 2 was at one beat faster per minute. Cut 3 was 1 beat faster per minute until we had to slow down, for how you have an ebb and a flow in an album, and then come back up. So it was very carefully laid out tempo-wise for yes, go, please. Sorry, somebody walking by.
That's cool.
Very carefully laid out for the dance people. Now, they weren't a dance band at all.
No, of course.
We weren't looking to be a disco band.
Yeah.
And we didn't want to change from the blues roots that they had come from. They came from deep blues
Oh, yeah.
stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Just in a heavy rock style. So sort of, it's kind of a way AC/DC did as well, in a way.
Oh, they absolutely were, without question. Yep.
Talking to Mutt once, I said, that stuff you did, Highway to Hell and Back in Black and all the other great things you did, to me, it's Little Richard with a Marshall on 11. He said, that's exactly it. But you do. You have influences. You go back to the roots. That's what inspires you as you're coming up. So as I said earlier, we started every day recording Eliminator by listening to Highway to Hell and getting inspired by it. Yeah. And then we got a guitar sound we liked, which was one Dean guitar with a DiMarzio Super Distortion pickup, straight out of that pickup into a Legend 50-watt hybrid amp, half tube, half solid state, one AKG C414, which model, what, black on the back, anyway, whichever model, 414 mic, one mic only one mic in one place, never moved it for the whole album.
Wow.
Never changed the amp setting, never changed the guitar setting. Used one of 2 different Dean guitars, rhythm, lead, nothing changed. We got the sound we liked. I remember the day that we started recording Sharp Dressed Man, and I had the beats all set up. I was so excited. I'd gone home to my home studio and set the beats and got everything sounded just really dance and go into the tempo I wanted, put it on, and Billy cranked that guitar up, and that came. Once we got the feedback turned down, because it was always on the verge of massive feedback. Yeah. As he played in the control room, loud as possible over the studio monitors, and we were just blasting.
Yeah.
So that tone came out, and I just looked up, and Billy looked up and went, "Oh my God!" And he said, "Don't change a thing." I said, "Yeah. It ain't changing until we packed up and wrapped the whole studio." And that's what it was: one sound, one guitar, one guy on the whole thing, and we just went through the songs. Rather than sometimes, so we would keep the feel going, keep the sound, the wall of distorted sound going. He would even, when it came time for a chord change, instead of moving his hands to the next chord, he would just keep playing that chord in that same place, then would go to another set of 2 tracks and pick up recording from the next chord so that the sound never went finger movement.
Yeah.
Just was a wall of never-ending sound with the drum samples blasting. I stole a snare from Let's Dance, Bob Clearmountain's snare.
Yeah.
And then I mixed it in with a few other things. I did mix things all together with new drum sounds, and we just said, we're going to make it different. Let's go different. A lot of synth on the bass. A lot of the bass was synthesizer.
Yeah.
98% of the album was just me and Billy in the control room, just going crazy.
Wow.
But it worked, and it changed. A lot of their fans hated it first.
Yeah.
A lot of the reviews were, "Oh my God, this," but after it sold 20 million or whatever worldwide, that didn't matter anymore.
Absolutely.
Nobody ever said at the time, "What is this drum machine thing?" or these samples, because the rock albums didn't have machines.
That's right. Yeah.
It was anathema. You did not do that. But we had to do something, so we did what we could. So, and I did have Frank sounds in there some too, but I would move them around, sample them, use his tom rolls and fit them in things. He wasn't totally not on the album, but nobody said a word except Bob Ludwig. And I decided, you know what? If we're going to have such a radical difference in the timing, the drum sounds, the synth, the feel, everything of this album, if you listen to the album, Give Me All Your Lovin', track 1, side 1, starts with only the drum machine,
right.
Nothing else. And I said, if we're going to have it, let's just put it right up front. And if they hate it, they can hate it from the beginning. But nobody said, no DJs, anybody, what's this thing with these machines?
Yeah.
The only person who said anything was Bob Ludwig. And when he said it, we were mastering it, and he looked down and he looked at the grooves. And as you know, when you've got something that's tightly sequenced, it makes a pattern on the grooves.
Correct.
You see it, the way it goes across. Yeah. And he looked down and said, hey, this is done to, it's a machine, isn't it? Yeah. He said, I didn't know from hearing. I only know from looking at the grooves. So except for that, nobody had even noticed it. But as you said, we were vindicated later if sales count.
Tell me, Terry, as you were coming up as a younger man, who were the people that mentored you or influenced you, as a youngster? My
very first mentor was extremely important to me. His name was Bobby Fuller, and he was from El Paso, where I was living at that time, and I'm again living. I was a 13-year-old kid in junior high school. Bobby was, at that time, he seemed so much older and more adult, even though he was still probably 19, maybe 20 or something. But he was a kid, but to me, when you're 13 or 14, someone that's 19 or 20, that's a huge difference. But he had a local band here, first just called Bobby Fuller, then Bobby Fuller and the Fanatics, and then a couple of other names. Later, of course, as you probably know, and many people know, he moved from El Paso to Los Angeles. The band became known as the Bobby Fuller Four, and he had this huge, massive hit, I Fought the Law, worldwide, and two or three other big hits, Let Her Dance and Love's Made a Fool of You, several big hits. But at the time, I went to my junior high school dance at Bassett Junior High in El Paso, the Bassett Hounds, Go Hounds. And I was the quarterback on the Bassett. I was the Hounds quarterback.
Yeah.
But I went to a dance, our class dance, we're 13 or 14, and the band playing was Bobby Fuller. And I just, oh my God, because his records were on the radio.
Yeah.
And I didn't know they were local records on the local radio. I thought, you hear your local station, that's it. So I thought, wow, this big star worldwide is here playing our school dance. But no, he was a local star, but he was the local star. He had his own record label. He had his own home studio with, again, Ampex, Telefunken mics, real studio, a reverb chamber. And he had his own nightclub, the Rendezvous Club. He was big stuff locally in the Southwest area. So I was just over the moon. I was listening. The first rock band I had ever heard live, first band I heard anywhere, was at this dance, Bobby Fuller. And I was just mesmerized. I was just so taken with it. So I went up to him. I had been messing around at home with the guitar. We had a little band we called the Wild Ones. We're kind of doing a few things that we thought we could do, very naively and badly probably. But I went up to Bobby during one of the breaks and said, "Oh, Mr. Fuller, I've got a band. I've got a guitar at home. I didn't bring it, but you think I could sit in and sing a song with you or something?" And instead of being what he probably should have done is just a standard rock jerk, as a kid, go get a drink, sit down, I'm tired. This is my break time. He said, "Sure, son, come on up." So he sat there, gave me his Stratocaster, picked up his other guitarist instrument, and played along with me. And I sang to my class, Peggy Sue and Donna. And Bobby played and sang with me. And it was just, after that, it was over. That's it. Okay, this is what I'm doing. This is it. So I would bother him incessantly. I would call him up. I would go by his house. And his house, believe it or not, was at 9500 Album Avenue. That's where his house, and the house is still there. Now there is a Bobby Fuller Drive in Memphis, but his house was on Album Avenue. So I would go by there. How do you write a song? How are you producing? What is that mic doing? What's going on? And he would take time and stop. He would spend an hour on the phone with me, explaining song lyrics and things. We even wrote a song together over the phone.
Wow.
I've got an idea. Well, what if you did this? Someday I'll record that song. But
I think that's an amazing story, and it just goes to show how, you know, how a pivotal moment like that could change a kid's life. You know, from someone who, you know, as you said, because when you're young, you look up to people, and because you got this certain perception of them, and then when these people not only meet but exceed your expectations by giving you time. And I know myself, Terry, as a youngster, you know, guys who would give me the time of day with no obligation whatsoever to me. I mean, at the end of the day, I really meant nothing, and I had nothing really of value to bring to their world, and yet they took me under their wing and taught me a lot of stuff and that. And I always made a promise with myself that if I ever get to a level where I have my own place, I want to do the same. And so it's just paying forward, and the importance of mentorship, and the importance of also just humility, just to and it never ceases to amaze me. I have such a privilege to get to speak to great people around the world who are great at their work and high profile, and even as a kid, I just, even though everyone had their own personality, but there was still this level of humility about themselves. They didn't identify with their work. They were, hey, I'm Joe Blow, and this just happens to be what I do, and I love what I do.
Exactly, that's how it is. Unless you, or not you, I mean, but unless one is one of those ego people, and they don't really last that long. That's all they're doing. It's about them, me, all that. I learned from Bobby Fuller several things, and one was that exact thing you're saying, is to, if you see something in somebody, and the people who mentored you, one of the reasons they did it was because they were nice people and they were talented and they were paying forward. But another reason, I guarantee you, was they saw something in you. They looked at, and you somehow had a gleam, or they could just see. You can tell when somebody really gets it or really wants it, you know, more than anything. So I think maybe Bobby saw that in me. I don't know. I'm not trying to say I was worth it necessarily, but you learned, and I learned several things from him. One was that to be humble, to pay it forward, as you say. Another was what he taught me on a production level, and I'll never forget it. And another person that many years later, Mutt Lang, a very close friend, has repeated the same things. And I see that when you really do understand how to produce, this is the main thing you get. And that is, you can see every little thing. You can focus in with your microscope. You can zoom in on the waveform or whatever and get to the little detail and make it right. But if you don't pull back out in a macro level, see the big picture and how those little things fit together, you're not producing a record.
Yeah.
You're not. I'm sure in mastering it's the same thing. You can get all hung up on one little song and EQ in this one spot to get, but if that doesn't blend together with the whole song and then with all the songs as a unit, there's no point wasting that time. So
Correct.
I learned that word for word from Bobby. He said, I want to see the little things and the big things. And I just, wow, that was a revelation. I didn't even, it started me thinking to think what you're doing and why before you do it.
Yeah.
Rather than just, woohoo, take off and do something.
Yeah.
Start every session with some philosophy in mind. Yes, it will change as you go along. Yes, you will improvise. Yes, you'll find new things, experiment here and there, whatever. But if you have some basic thread that you're starting with, and I mean, it's really basic. Let's say if you're producing a band and you say, well, they're very power pop-like, they've got Beatle elements, they're this, that. So you just think, I'm going to remember what would the Beatles do with this situation, and sort of keep on that thread. And of course you'll throw in something maybe the Stones did, or throw in something else, or some improv thing you thought up, or the band thought up, or whatever. But I just start from a philosophy to begin with. And that's the first thing Bobby taught me as a mentor. Now, I was so lucky, because I went right about the time he moved from El Paso to Los Angeles. I moved from El Paso to Memphis. When I heard we were moving to Memphis, I was so excited, because I had all the 45s. I don't think maybe I had one album by that time, but it was all I could afford to get 145 record a week with my allowance or whatever I earned mowing on the lawn or something. But so I had my 45s, and some of them would have addresses on the labels, down on the bottom print of the label. And I remember reading 926 East Macklemore, Memphis, Tennessee, Stax Records. And when I heard we were moving to Memphis, immediately in my head, 926 East Macklemore, Stax Records. I just couldn't wait. I was going there. Yeah. So I literally took my guitar to school one day, left it in my locker. After school, took it out, got on the bus, went in the other direction towards Stax, as far as the bus would take me, got off at Macklemore, walked a few blocks, went to the studio, rang the bell. The receptionist let me in. She made small talk with me here and there a little bit. What are you doing, kid? Yeah. What? Oh, I'm here to sing, play, record, produce. Yes, I'm here. I made it. I've arrived. Okay. And just as she was about to usher me out, my second mentor walked in the door. This tall guy that I thought, again, was older, but not that much older, walks to the door, very handsome guy, looked down and said, "Hey, son, what's in that case?" "It's a Telecaster, sir." "Let me see it. Come on, I play a Telecaster." Well, he was Steve Cropper. And he sat down with me in a chair, playing the guitar, talking about it. Why are you here? What are you wanting to do? And I've come from El Paso. I've learned this. I've learned that. I've been talking to Bobby Fuller, and now I want to be in the music business and write and sing and play and record and produce, engineer and master and everything. And he says, "Slow down, calm down. You think you could do tape copies?" "Yes, sir, I can do anything." So he took me down and put me to work after school doing tape copies in their copy room at Stax. For free, of course, as just an intern. And that just turned into one day somebody didn't show up to the real studio, and I'd been looking over, saw the knobs, sort of knew what they were doing, pushed buttons, sound came out, okay, you're engineering, and it went from there. But without people like John Fry that I mentioned, Steve Cropper, Bobby Fuller, later Al Bell in the business side, also production and songwriting side. I mean, you just got to give it to those people, because you can't learn these things on your own.
Absolutely.
Now there are schools. When I started, there were no schools.
No, same.
Nothing like that. You just learned it. So you had to have, if you were lucky, and I was the luckiest person I can ever imagine, to bump into these amazingly smart, creative, intelligent people who would give their time to you. So
I think there's nothing greater you can do for a kid than them. And today these kids, their bullshit meters are so sensitive these days. So they can pick you a mile off. So, but when a kid actually believes that you're genuinely invested in them and that you believe in them, there's no greater thing you can do for a kid, as far as I'm concerned. Because I just remember those moments when, guys who didn't know me anything would have something genuinely nice to say, and usually at points where I thought about, this is too hard, I'm not sure if I'm worthy, will I be able to make something of myself? And the timing was always just quite extraordinary when, again, just that one thing, and that was believable, and it was like rocket fuel. Yep. It was like absolute rocket fuel. So
it's amazing. It's part being, some of it's talent. I'm sure both of us have. We're good at what we do, and I don't mind saying it. I'm sure you don't mind saying it. I'll say it. You're great at what you do.
Thank you.
But that's only one thing. It's things that other people give you. You can't just do it on your own.
No,
I don't know anybody really good, really up there that's been in the business as long as we have, who've done it completely on their own. You've got to give it to those other people.
Oh, it's always been.
I've learned some things from people what not to do. I don't don't mean that they're anti-mentors, sort of, but I won't mention any of those names. But
No.
occasionally you'll see something, you go, "Oh my gosh, I know not to do that now."
Well, there's something that's a really interesting point that you bring up, because quite often I say the same thing, in that I think personally my greatest lessons have been, well, firstly from my own mistakes, which I've made more than I care to mention, but also by observing other people. For me, it was being and watching people in the studio, watching how people run the sessions, and even the things they didn't do. My studio, for example, is more a combination of things I didn't do than the things I liked and that I appreciated and I thought were great ideas. And so for me, I'm grateful for even being around people who perhaps did things in a way that weren't necessarily in alignment with me and my values and how I do it. But nonetheless, it was still a great lesson. So, well, I won't be doing that. I won't be operating this way. I won't be having this kind of setup. So it's more, I think this studio and even the way I operate is more about what I learned how not to do things as opposed to how to do.
It's equally important. It's good to know things to do, but it's really good to know things not to do, especially when you're dealing with people. In a session, everything is as much psychology as it is technicalities of recording. You've got to keep the client or the band that you're working with or whoever happy. You've got to assess the level they're on mentally and go right there and keep the flow. Now, if you're mastering remotely on your own for something, you do it your way and you run. But if you've got a client in the studio with you, I'm sure you are very different than when you're by yourself.
Yeah.
Because you got to keep them happy. But more than importantly, you've got to get where they want to go, even if they don't know how you are going to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've always, the best, quite often people say what's mastering, and it's despite the fact that, with the internet, it still seems to be a little bit of a mystery around it. And that's one thing I really hate the whole black art myth around it. And it's one of the things I really want to try and bring mastering to the fore and tell kids this is a very viable thing. But I think the best definition that I was able to come up with to describe it to, shall we say, the layperson, is that it is a process where you're facilitating. I'm a facilitator of a process to help an artist or band realize their vision for their art. That's the best definition that I could come up with.
Final link in the chain.
So yeah, and I think the other thing too, the other two big things I learned too, Terry, is that this is a service I think specifically mastering more so than anything, it is a service industry first and foremost, and this is a relationship economy, and Rick told me very early. He said 80% of this job, he said, is bullshit. And I looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" He said, "It's about hang time. It's about relationship. It's about nurturing people. It's about psychology. It's about serving them. This is not about you. You may be good at your job and may be the Mac Daddy at this, but at the end of the day, you're there to serve them, and you're there to build trust with them, because that's what's going to get you back. You can be 85% great engineer and a sweetheart and someone who's empathetic and someone who will bend over backwards and be invested in the record, then be 100% of an engineer and just not be a very likable character. You won't last that long."
It's bedside manner of physicians, the same thing, really, how you relate. If we have time for it, an interesting story relating to all that and relating to Australia in particular, the band The Angels came to Memphis to do the first. I had worked with them on mixing and some other things, but we came to do an entire album from the ground up. That album became Beyond Salvation. It's their biggest album, went to #1, their first #1. But when they came to Memphis, they had obviously, as you know well, they had been big in Australia for many years. I sort of thought of it as the Rolling Stones of Australia are coming. Mm. They've been there, they've done that, they've toured everywhere you can imagine before the biggest crowds. In other words, in a way, they're jaded with it all. This is nothing new. So I decided to create an atmosphere that wasn't just making a record. But when they got there, I said, look, we're going to have a lot of fun here. And I don't mean just everybody going out and getting drunk or whatever, but we're going to record part of the day, and then we're going to go play out and be a band and sort of hang out and do stuff. So we made up a band we called Dancing Dick and the Richards. and we had a couple of other names we used too at the time. But we would go to a club starting around 11 at night. Usually we'd record up till maybe 2 or 3 in the morning. We'd stop about 11, from say noon to 11, record, and then go out at night, take our guitars only, and just find a band playing and literally drive them off the bandstand, take over, just take the place. And we'd just start playing and having fun. And we would do this, and we'd make up funny band names, and we'd do funny ideas of just everything crazy. We went all the way to a menu of crazy Canadian food that nobody knew what it was, eating seal meat and stuff.
Yeah.
Goofy things. And the whole point of it was just to have fun. We weren't there just to make a record. We weren't doing the same thing they had done 15 times already. I wanted something new and exciting and happy. And so when we came to the studio the next day, we were still sort of flying high from last night, playing crazy songs loud at 2 a.m. at some silly bar where the band was mad we had taken their amps from them. So it was just a lot of fun. And I think they had a lot of fun in that project, and it did really well. So sometimes it's about that. It's about the craziness around that you can make around you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Terry, I'm aware that we've been speaking for a little while, and I'd love to speak to you some more, but would you be good enough at some point later in the year to come back again?
Absolutely, anytime. This has been a lot of fun.
Because again, we could talk for hours, and there's lots of different things to talk about. But before we go, I would just ask you, for any young aspiring creatives out there who are wanting to get their foot in the door, so that they either might be thinking about it and haven't started, or they're pretty new and they've just got their start. And what are some of the things you'd want to encourage them to think about, or in terms of moving forward with their careers? What are the important things that they should be focusing on as they're building their clientele base?
You mean in what area of the business?
Well, in terms of, I'm a real believer in the mindset. I believe that when the mindset is right, then everything else will take care of itself. So I think what I see a lot of is a lot of kids just they're a little bit low in confidence. They're thinking maybe they're not worthy. They feel that if they don't have this particular bit of gear, or if they don't have all the toys, that they can't operate. What are would you encourage them to just learn how to be more resourceful, about being more relationship driven in terms of trying to make their way out there, like not to give up. I mean, it could be a simple message like that, but what are things you'd encourage kids to do?
Well, not giving up is a big part of it. I think, first of all, if you can possibly do it, the mentorship avenue that we spoke about, if you can find someone like yourself, or there are many good people in studios and mastering rooms and all over the world that they could give their time to. Now, sometimes you can't just be an unpaid intern anymore. A lot of laws have changed to where they have to pay somebody, or they are taking advantage. Like, all that knowledge you're getting doesn't count. But if you can find someone good to mentor you, that's a great thing. If you do get involved in a studio situation and you're the entry-level person, I think it's very important to remember to be there early. Don't ever be there stoned or drunk or anything. You've got to have your wits about you, get enough rest, eat right. I myself am a vegan most all of my life. Don't drink or do drugs or anything. I work out. I try to keep my head in the game. And when they do that, they also need to know their place in the chain of things. I've seen so many people who are interning or trying to come in overstepping their bounds. Now, I don't mean that you shouldn't have confidence and speak up when you really know something good to say. But if you are annoying the A&R guy or pestering the engineer or coming up with, shouldn't you be doing that? Or why are you doing it that way? Wouldn't it be better? That's not your place at that point. Try to learn from them. You can learn the good things usually, and occasionally you see the bad things and learn from it. But know your place. Don't my dog is hopping around like crazy. Don't overstep your bounds. And I think really, yeah, I've had an intern once who came in, interned for a while. I tried to explain to him, we're going to get there early. We're going to work 18 hours. It's not a fun job half the time. It's going to be hard work. And it's music. It's going to be so exciting. There are going to be stars around. Well, after about a week and a half, he was literally running out of the door screaming, "You're crazy, working like this." Well, he doesn't need to be in this business.
Yeah.
If you can figure out that you can't spend a 20-hour day to finish the album, you shouldn't be doing this, because we've all had to do that.
Yeah.
It happens, and it's going to happen again. Like I say, I worked once, literally, honestly, 7 years without a single day off.
Crazy.
It's a tough business. It's not all glamour and glitz. But if they really, really want to do it, and they know if they're the ones, if they can't live without it, I'm a musician. I've got to do music. Sure, learn other things. Take your English classes. Take your math. Get a degree. That's a good thing. I always say if you can get a degree too, that's good to have. But if you don't have that drive, and then keep your confidence up, keep moving. And another thing I think that's important, if you're asked to do something, can you do it? Say yes. You can learn it overnight if you have to. Several times I've been asked, can you do a certain thing? Absolutely. And then I'm on the internet, or before that in books reading, how do you make MIDI work? How do you do this? Well, something you didn't know, you've got to learn it. But don't just say, no, I can't do that. Where are you going to get doing that? If you really can't do it, they'll find out. But if you really can, you'll find out. Yeah. So I don't have many words of what to do. It's a tough business to get through. No,
that's great advice, Terry. That's great advice and great pearls of wisdom. So I want to thank you so much for giving us your time today, mate. It's been an honour and a pleasure, and just great to hear some great history and some great stories and some great pearls of wisdom. And we definitely got to get you back, because I'd love to talk more about just currently what you've been doing, where you're going, and I think we touched a little bit on it about diet and sleep, and quite often in our industry where we live a very sedentary lifestyle, and I believe that the hours are very trying and it's difficult to find balance, but just the holistic aspect of being an engineer and being able to operate at your best and those sort of things. So obviously you're a very fit man. You run your marathons. You're vegan. You've got a clear mind. So I think these are things that are important as well, and we can touch on that another time, because I think it's a worthwhile conversation to have.
It's very important, I think. So yeah, I'd love to.
So we'll leave the door open for that for another time. So I want to thank you, Terry Manning. I want to thank my sponsor, Omega MMA in Collingwood. For those of you who want to get into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, grappling, wrestling, it's a great fun place to train. We're a family-friendly club. We're a female-friendly club. George Soteropoulos, who fought in the UFC, one of the best jiu-jitsu coaches you could ever ask for, the real deal. It's a great club. We're a friendly bunch down there. So if you want to come down, get fit, hang around a bunch of really great people and have fun as well, come on down and check us out, Omega MMA in Collingwood, and thank you for their support. Once again, Terry Manning, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate your time. It's been a great podcast, and continued success to you, my friend, and good health, and we'll talk to you again real soon.
Same to you, Tony. Thanks so much, and see you soon.
All right. Thanks a lot, guys. As always, say, please be nice to each other, but more importantly, be nice to yourselves. I love you fuckers. And we'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.